Well, it's 4 o'clock. Welcome to the February 18th meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board. This meeting is held in accordance with Executive Order N 2920. The Humboldt County Association of Government meetings will be held virtually until further notice. If you would like to make public comment on an item, please call 669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 838-0554-1997, and then press *9 on your phone. This will raise your hand and you will continue to hear the meeting while you're on the call. When it's time for your comment, your phone will be unmuted and you will hear a prompt that will indicate your phone is ready. Please state your name and begin your comment, and you will have 3 minutes to comment. And at this time, we're called to order, and could we get a roll call, Christy?
Okay, Supervisor Bass.
Here.
Mayor Jones.
Here.
Mayor Seaman.
Here.
Mayor Hindley.
Here.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
Here.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember West.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Mike Johnson.
Here.
PAC members, Councilmember Arroyo.
Here.
Jesse Robertson.
Here.
Thank you.
And at this time, we will adjourn as the HCOG board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And our first order of business is public participation. Do we have anybody online or anybody for public participation?
No, we do not.
Okay, with that, we'll move to approval of the meeting record. Has everyone had time to go over that?
I would move the approval of the meeting record of January 21st, 2021.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Okay, Supervisor Bass.
Yes.
Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Mayor Seaman.
Yes.
Mayor Hindley.
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember West.
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Arroyo.
I wasn't present, so I'll recuse myself.
Thank you. Mr. Robertson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
All right, thank you. At this time, we'll enter our first action item, a final Eureka Broadway multi-corridor plan presentation and enclosures. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. This is Beth Burks, Executive Director of HCOG. I'll be starting the staff report. This item is to consider acceptance of the final Eureka Broadway multimodal corridor plan. The draft plan became before your board in December as an informational item. And the draft plan also went to the TAC in January. At their January meeting, the TAC did recommend that the HCOG board accept the plan. So we have a few parts to our presentation today. We'll start with Brad Medham, Caltrans Deputy Director of Planning and Local Assistance for District 1. And he can give a little background about the grant that allowed us to embark on this plan and a brief overview of Caltrans involvement. Then Jesse Willer, City Engineer from the City of Eureka, will be able to talk about the project from the city's perspective. And then finally, Todd Jurgenza, our consultant with GHD, will give a presentation with an overview of the project, a discussion of how we incorporated the public comments we received on the draft, and also our next steps. And the presentation will include much of the same background that you received in December. And we're doing this on purpose. And I wanted to spend some time revisiting the assumptions and the process for the benefit of our board members who were not here in December. And also because this plan is really ambitious, it's complicated, and it's also really important. And I think it's great if we can start with a common understanding of how we got to this point and where we're going to go from here. So with that, I'd like to send it over to Deputy Director Medham for a few words on Caltrans' behalf.
Thank you, Beth. Mr. Chair, members of the board, Beth asked me to give you a little bit of history. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not on mute. I'm good now. Give a little bit of history about how we got to this point. And the stretch of 101 that we commonly call Broadway is certainly one of the more congested stretches of the state highway in our district. We have studied it for a number of years, looking for ways to both ease congestion and improve safety along that corridor. As we all know, there's significant pedestrian crossings in that corridor, and there are always issues out there. One of the things that Caltrans did when we were studying it, though, is we were basically sticking to our footprint and looking at the highway, 101 as it passes through Eureka. We were very supportive of the city's proposal to do this study because they were able to go further out and sort of look at a broader scale and other alternatives that we typically would not look at. So we started with a Sustainable Communities Planning Grant. It was $304,000 to go through this process. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to also look at funding sources. So there's a congested corridor program in SB1 that they wanted to make certain that whatever came out of this was appropriate for application to that corridor. So sometimes when you see congestion relief in this plan, it's there mainly because of the funding source that they were aiming at when they were putting this together. So there were, I know, some criticisms about we shouldn't be worrying about the congestion, and it wasn't really there because that was the issue. It's because that's where the money was. So bear that in mind. We've been a continuous participant in the program from its inception, working with the city, with HCOG, to make certain that that there weren't issues that we would bring it to the table at the very last minute that might cause fatal flaws. That's always a problem when somebody's doing a study on somebody else's system. Is they say, well, that's great, but we can't do that. So we wanted to avoid that pitfall, and we've been involved, and also we're part of the modeling effort. So in addition, one of the alternatives included some improvements on the south end. We were able to apply through there was a complete streets reservation in what's called the SHOP, the State Highway Operations and Protection Program. There was about $50 million available there. We put in for 13 million of that and actually got it for District 1. It's the only project that was proposed that is a standalone project. All of the rest were, can we add some money to this project so we can add complete streets elements? In this case, we're proposing a class 4 bike lane from Truesdale down to Herrick. And Jamie Matteo is here. He'll give you a bit more of an update a little later. But that's sort of the history of how we got to where we are. And I wanted you to know that Caltrans is totally supportive of what's being proposed.
Thanks so much, Brad. Jesse, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, board and Mr. Commissioner. I guess just to start off, I think kind of some of the sentiments that Brad left off with there and kind of head out throughout, we've really, from the onset, we started as looking at this as a group effort and how do we address this really critical corridor throughout our community. It is not only a local corridor, it's a regional facility, and it's very important to the county and to the city of Eureka and to Caltrans, to everyone. So knowing that there were some very significant issues on the corridor, whether it be safety or lack of non-motorized transportation facilities and other things, we really felt it was important to push hard and try to, again, bring the topic of Broadway back to the forefront and make sure that we come out in the end with a plan that, while as Beth said, might be a little adventurous, it's also has a lot of benefit in the long run. And it may not be easy, but the long-term benefit that come out of it could be very important for our community. So I think that's the attitude that we came in with it. And we've tried to keep that throughout. We've tried to make sure that we're, hearing from the community. We've had a number of stakeholder and community-wide meetings, which we'll kind of touch on in the presentation. But just really think there's opportunities going forward are already starting to show themselves. As Brad mentioned, the south end of the project having what is the beginning of a project there. And on our side, from the city side, we're working on on the north end of the corridor to try to resolve some of the issues that are there, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we certainly see this as something that does have benefit and is going to move forward. And so with that, I'll stop yapping here and get on to Todd, who will be presenting tonight on the project. So back to you, Beth.
All right, Todd, you ready? Oh, get off here.
Muted, sorry about that, and
No
trying
problem.
to get everything lined up here. Okay, let me do my screen share. All right, how's that? Does everyone see the right thing?
Yep.
Okay, good. Always a roll of the dice. All right, thank you. Great introductions, and thank you all for having us here to present the plan. Very exciting. This has been the culmination of a long effort now, and we're very excited to be here at the end of the road, end of the first road, I should say. Implementation of this project will involve many roads, some of which will be longer and windier than others. But this is a fantastic first step. And as soon as I get my controls up, I'm going to start the presentation. Okay. So I want to review some of the background history of the project, the purpose and need, why we did this. This has been touched upon, but I think we have some new board members here tonight. So just for everyone's interest, I want to go through a brief, I would say a rerun of what we talked about last time we met in front of many of you. So this project started, it was a grant application funded project, but it addresses issues that have been long recognized on the corridor. Safety needs, some safety concerns. There are a lot of collisions along the corridor. This is data that we continued to collect as the project went on. Pedestrian and bicycle collisions, vehicular collisions, overturned trucks. So lots of different types of collisions, lots of traffic. And so there's an impact to society, either direct or indirect through that. Multimodal options, we wanted to give people options to not only drive around town. You have a beautiful trail along the waterfront. Broadway currently serves as somewhat of a barrier, probably reducing the amount people feel comfortable getting out to the trail, especially from the southern end of the corridor where there aren't a lot of great crossings. We wanted to control travel demand and congestion as well. So it is, as the name suggests, a congested corridor. Now it's not always congested. This is not, like downtown Los Angeles or something. We're not dealing with nonstop bumper to bumper traffic, but the congestion is frequent enough that it becomes a nuisance to citizens. It also, what we found is the travel time reliability is low. And so there's this infrequent congestion that happens where on a typical Tuesday afternoon, you may not encounter much traffic, but it happens frequently enough that you end up planning for longer trips than it may take, because you know that there are prone to be either blockages in the lanes or other minor fender benders, things that cause backups to occur. There's clearly and also a community enhancement component of this. So Broadway is today not the most beautiful corridor, and we wanted to look at opportunities to enhance it, make it more beautiful, bring in some more landscaping, really enhance the community and the business environment to try to promote some local economic growth and make those businesses that are already there have a more inviting and appealing environment for folks to walk or bike to or drive to. So I think that's enough said on that. And I'm going to go through some things relatively quickly. There's a lot in the back of the PowerPoint. If there's any questions, I can drill down into more details as well. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about our alternatives process. So this corridor has been under discussion and under study for decades. Going back, I think we found documents from the 70s talking about bypasses, connections across the peninsula. Lots of different options have been floated at various times, freeway conversion of the whole corridor. And so we wanted to revisit that a little bit in the report, but not dwell on things that were really well and done eliminated. So the entire wholesale bypasses of the town were they were off the table. Widening of Broadway and blowing out existing businesses, that we identified early on as having an unacceptable impact on the existing business community, the existing neighborhood, and not necessarily the type of improvement we wanted out of this anyway, as it may just induce more traffic. So Broadway widening was out. Fairfield couplets and some other concepts were also dismissed due to neighborhood impact concerns. And ultimately we landed on 8 alternatives, and they were all somewhat close variations of one another, but they are in some these. One is to improve the existing alignment, right? Work with what we've got. The other was to look at couplets and extensions. So things that have been explored before, things that haven't. The Waterfront Drive extension has been discussed in the past. We took a look at that. Coster Street couplet. We looked at also lane reconfiguration, so the opposite of widening. How can we make it a safer, more multimodal corridor using the right-of-way we have? So we looked at road diets going down to 3 lanes, 1 lane per direction, things like that. And we looked at a variety of multimodal and safety improvements. With the end goal, really, to keep in mind, I think this was mentioned in the introduction, that we recognize the tremendous cost that an improvement of this magnitude will have. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we generate has a return on investment, demonstrated return on investment. That's measured in our lingo as benefit costs. So we want the benefit cost ratio to be high so that it's competitive for grant funding in the future. We worked with the stakeholder community. We worked with a stakeholder focus group. We also had surveys to the business community themselves and to gauge their appetite for various improvement suggestions. And we had community workshops. We've also had several presentations in front of governing boards that are also public. So we tried our best, despite the COVID restrictions that really eliminated a whole portion of our scope that spoke to public workshops and going out to the community at farmers markets and things like that. We had to go fully digital, but we tried to leverage the best tools we had at our disposal to do so. This is an illustration just to the extent of the depths we went to look at all the alternatives that could feasibly be pursued, and only a fraction of these ended up being really quantified in full. Oh, I'm going to get right to those because I can tell I've already been talking too much. One thing we used to analyze this corridor is we applied what's called the Smart Mobility Framework. This is a framework that was developed by Caltrans going on some time now, but it remains relevant and it remains a core component of the Caltrans corridor planning guidelines. This really ensures that any planning study that comes in that's funded through Caltrans or Caltrans funding through grant opportunities is a holistic study. So we look at the environment, we look at social equity, we look at economic factors, health and safety, and reliable mobility. And that's where that congestion factor really comes in. These are a number of the different criteria we use to evaluate our concepts. We looked at safety, speed reduction. So again, not to get into the weeds here, I don't want to read off the PowerPoint, but we had a performance metric associated with each one of those measures so that we could quantify the relative benefit of each alternative. On your screen, you see a couple of the sheets that we developed for each one of those 8 alternatives I showed on the prior screen. And then ultimately we landed on really one preferred concept with a few variations that are possible. I'll get to those in just a brief second. Public input was due to the length of the project. It was a long public outreach process. We did hit a bit of a schedule hiccup with COVID and kind of having to reformulate how we were going to engage the community, what direction the project went. And so our website has remained live. And early on in the process, we had an online social pinpoint website. So that's where people can click and give their feedback. We're able to map the concerns on a map of the study area, really useful information. Also useful beyond the scope of this study for any future grant applications. You now have a record of public input and concerns along the corridor and not just on Broadway. So good output of the study is also that permanent record. We had several workshops, one in person, one digital, and then we had these focus group meetings where we worked with some of your community stakeholders, critical stakeholders that we wanted to engage with closely. A couple of times, actually, I think there was a third informal meeting with them as well, and the business community survey. We posted the draft plan. It must have been over 30 days ago. I forget the exact date, I apologize. But we received a number of comments and we did make some adjustments to the final report. And I'll go over a bullet list of those changes in a second. These were the retained alternatives. So again, going back to that, improving the Broadway, the current alignment, we had pros and cons there. And then we kind of build up to our ultimate preferred plan, which is the one on the far right. So one step up from the improved Broadway, which we can improve multimodal connectivity. We can develop the complete streets along Broadway using the existing alignment, but it doesn't give us as much benefit, particularly in the north area. When you get to Del Norte and further north to downtown, the Coster couplet concept opens up a tremendous amount of right-of-way that we can now get continuous bikeways, we can get transit amenities, we can get wider sidewalks, we can get good improvements from Del Norte up to downtown when we introduce the Coster couplet. And I'll show some of the trade-offs of what we can do and what we can't do without that couplet alignment. And then the next level up, so to speak, getting into a more challenging implementation now for this project, but it's the double couplet scenario where we add a new couplet south of Del Norte, north of the Bayshore Mall, hugging the backsides of businesses, but encroaching on wetland area, right? So sensitive environmental areas. And there may be ways to minimize that impact. In fact, there may be ways to make this project a real boon, a real fantastic wetland mitigation project and sea level rise adaptation project, but it will be a challenge. So there's no two ways about that. We go through the trade-offs of that and the benefits that it allows us as well. It provides traffic operational benefits by adding that couplet, because even though it has more right-of-way than north of Del Norte, that Coster section, it has less right-of-way than south of the Bayshore Mall. And so south of the Bayshore Mall, we don't have any couplets, no new alignments recommended. We can get what we need within the existing alignment. And in that way, that is the easiest section of the plan to implement. Okay, so this is kind of a reiteration of what I just showed, different kind of layout, but some highlights of what we get in each section. Southern segment with no real widening. There may be some pockets of intersections where we need to do a little bit of moving of the curb lines, but we provide class 4 separated bikeways, transit queue jump lanes. So getting the buses out in front of traffic as it's stopped at a traffic light, they can jump to the front of the queue. That can also serve double duty as a right turn pocket. So there are ways to do that without making a super wide intersection. We provide pedestrian crossing enhancements, a long list, and many of these treatments are applied essentially throughout the corridor. But the highlights here, in my mind, longitudinally speaking, are the class 4 bikeways and the transit lanes. So then the middle segment, as I mentioned, we had these two options, the couplet, which does give us the class 4 bikeways and the transit lanes. And then falling back to the existing alignment, we can probably still get class 4s bikeways, or we could get transit lanes. But if we were to choose, we would definitely choose the class 4 bikeways, because essentially the traffic and speed, the volume and speed of traffic on Broadway really requires class 4 bikeways in order to attract any interest from cyclists other than those that are really the most confident and experienced. If you want any hope of attracting moderately enthusiastic cyclists, even people with kids, families, class 4 bikeways are really the way to go on Broadway. And it is the right application on this corridor. The northern segment, the last segment where we recommend Coster in our full build alternative, again, gives us the class 4 bikeways and the transit lanes. Here, the trade-off is much more pronounced. Without the couplet, we don't have room for class 4 bikeways, and we don't have room, frankly, for class 2 bike lanes in many cases. We can fit those in many of the segments between intersections, but once you get to the intersections, you have turn pockets, you have all kinds of things going on that won't fit bike lanes. And so then, unless we remove turn lanes, which I think would be really problematic in terms of demonstrating the benefit to congestion and regional mobility, unless you do that, you're going to have to put the cyclists back into the general traffic lane. So again, more pronounced trade-offs if we don't go with the Coster couplet on the northern segment, and hence our recommendation to go for that. I've probably mentioned most of this. Some other highlights I see on the screen that maybe I haven't touched on: the optimization of the signals with the couplet system. You're eliminating a phase of traffic. And so even though you're not adding new traffic lanes, that traffic is able to move more efficiently, even if it's moving at a slower average travel speed. We're not saying we want to encourage higher speeds. That runs counterintuitive to all the benefits we're trying to generate here. But the signals, by eliminating the phase, they do two things. They get the vehicles that are out there moving more efficiently. They also reduce the number of conflict points at intersections. And so it eliminates some really important conflict points where you have T-bone intersections, head-on crashes, things like that. If you don't have an opposite lane of traffic, that eliminates a lot of those potential crash points. I'm going to keep going because we're running low on my time, I'm sure. Some refinements that we made in response to comments. So most of what I just presented was already in there, but we did receive some really useful comments. And one of them was that we may have overstated some of the transit ridership benefits. So we made an assumption that we could get near BRT, bus rapid transit service quality on the corridor. We still believe that to be the case. But because that relies on funding beyond what we can guarantee through infrastructure spending, that requires, funding more bus drivers and programs that are going to support enhanced transit, we decided to remove that transit benefit from the benefit cost calculation. So we're still advocating for it, but we're not counting it, so to speak. Confirmed inclusion of environmental mitigation remediation costs. So those costs are not known, right? We talk about the middle couplet, Coster couplet. There are issues with both of those. And we did include costs, and we re-highlighted those in the document. We believe they're in the ballpark of what's necessary, but more discoveries will be made as the project moves forward, no doubt. But we wanted to make clear that we did include that because there was some question about that. We also clarified the differences of what the different improvements we could get if we don't get the couplets, right? So if we don't get the Coster couplet or we don't get the middle couplet, what can we get within the existing alignment? And we had always intended that to be kind of a fallback option, but we've elevated in the plan so that even though I just went through great lengths to explain why the other alignments are so much better, there's still a good project there, particularly in the middle section, if you can't get the middle alignment. We also showed opportunities to share the transit lanes in the southbound direction in the couplets. I'll show that on the next slide. Those can be bike lanes as well. And that was a comment we got, that every roadway should have a bike lane, and bikes would certainly be free to use the transit only lanes where they're present. There's a 12-foot shoulder essentially dedicated to transit use. And then the last thing is we received a comment, and this was always in our mind, but I do think we lost track of it maybe in the preparation of the report, is that we wanted to highlight the beautification opportunities in the landscaping. And so we prepared this rendering that's on the cover of the report now, the final report, to show where some of those opportunities are and reinforce that in the text of the report as well. That has benefits beyond beautification as well in terms of stormwater management. And so we think that is a strong component of the plan. And again, you can't get that without the couplets. Okay, so here is another illustration of the benefits, again, of the couplets versus trying to keep the existing alignment. This is the middle segment, and you can see there's still, even with the class 4s, a 56-foot crossing distance for a pedestrian. That's assuming you don't have right turn pockets. With the couplets, you get down to 36-foot crossing distance. It's a much shorter range of exposure, particularly when you think that one of those lanes is dedicated to buses. We're really down to almost 24 feet of vehicular traffic exposure for pedestrians, which should cut down on the potential for pedestrian crashes significantly along the corridor. Along the northern segment, these are some of the trade-offs already discussed, but here's an illustration of some of the constraints we have. Option 1 here on the top left, you probably don't see my cursor. With the bike lanes, you can see how it works in the segment, but imagine yourself approaching an intersection and you need a left turn pocket or a right turn pocket. There's just not room for that bike lane anymore. So it's got to go somewhere. And it probably shares the lane. So again, why we really recommend pursuing the couplet option proactively on the northern segment. And then here's an illustration of how the bike and the buses could share that lane. Buses are, again, maybe 4 times an hour, hopefully more in the future. I think right now it's less than that. So most of the time that lane will be open. And so that would certainly be an opportunity to stripe it as a class 2 option, a place where cyclists can bike if they want to be on the southbound couplet section. Okay, and I think we've gone through most of these already. So I'm going to zoom through these because there's some pretty pictures here. I can walk through the corridor. I'm going to start maybe from Kmart and go up towards the Bayshore Mall. But really, a lot of this is a repetition of what I've already explained. So maybe I can come back to this if there are any questions. Here's an illustration of where the couplets would meet or diverge depending on the direction you're traveling next to the Bayshore Mall. This is the middle couplet section. And on the left of the screen, you can see approximately where we would hope to maybe plan to have the southbound alignment. It may have to be pushed further west, or it may be found to be completely infeasible once we really get into it. But we like this alignment right here, where it's really within a walking distance of the northbound alignment. It's close enough that it doesn't cause a major headache to businesses, including new businesses that have popped up recently along the corridor. They can still get traffic to and from them without a massive diversion. It's basically a city block away. And then the northern section, we have the nice 3D rendering of it now, but here's a more top-down view of that Del Norte Y, where the two couplets would diverge or merge. And you can see the red lanes here, that if you need a dedicated right turn pocket, you can have a striped red lane similar to a green lane you're used to seeing for bikes, a bus-only lane. And that would be safe where only buses or emergency response vehicles would be able to go. They would get preemption. And so that would be dedicated space, really elevating the profile and the utility of transit along the corridor. This balloon track area, obviously not without its controversies. We showed an alignment here. There's lots of options, but we think that this is a decent framework to start planning from. There's been some discussion over the course of the project of whether it ought to connect to waterfront. We didn't show it in this plan at this point. We do like also the connection of Commercial Street. There's a decent amount of westbound traffic on this commercial segment. It's essentially 6th Street today. And we don't want to reroute all those folks around. And so we'd like to be able to give them a connection to the southbound alignment of 101, but clearly more study is needed on that. With that, I'm going to take a break and hand it over to Jesse to discuss some of the environmental considerations that we've really included in our framework and our thinking about this project.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. So yeah, there's what Todd was discussing is really the meat of this study. It's a transportation study, transportation for both non-motorized, motorized, taking in consideration pedestrians. There's other pieces that go along with projects that always come along with project. In our case, especially when given that we are in the coastal zone. So I'll talk a little bit about each one of these bullet points to kind of highlight some of the things that we're certainly tracking. And one that doesn't show up on this list is one that Todd brought up that I think maybe it bears discussion from the standpoint of it's a consideration and potentially an environmental consideration that really wasn't highlighted as much, the planting along Broadway, because we've heard all along, of course, beautification, and it's difficult sometimes to get at beautification into a corridor plan from the standpoint of being able to highlight dollars that could go towards funding plantings and that sort of thing, because it's very difficult for grant funding sources or transportation funding sources. The dollars don't typically go towards planting trees or landscaping, that sort of thing. However, it's certainly something that is necessary in the corridor. We've heard it time and time again. And so I think from a standpoint of environmental considerations, greenery, landscaping, trees, and that sort of thing are definitely something that will be considered. Even from the standpoint of stormwater treatment with LID features, the overall context of what Todd's talking about with the couplets, the preferred opportunities, it gives us additional right of way to include these treatments, whether it's street trees, landscaping, or LID features that incorporate vegetation. Those are all much more available to have good, strong designs incorporated into the plan with a couplet style approach. So our next topic would be contamination. If we could advance to the next slide.
Jesse, I don't think we have your other slides in here.
Okay, that's fine. We can.
I'm sorry.
I'll just roll through these. I'll roll through these, let you get a drink of water. The contamination point really comes up strongly in this particular corridor on the balloon track, where there's been known contamination from the historic practice of having that be a rail yard. So the rail yard there, there's just contaminations associated with trains and whether it's fueling of trains or any of the maintenance practices of trains and storage of fuel and that sort of thing. So we definitely know that there are contaminants on that site. It's something the city is looking at right now, of trying to do an evaluation through EPA brownfield site assessment grant that we have. So it's nothing that we we're definitely taking that in consideration, and there's a large associated cost with that. It's also a private parcel, so there's constraints there, and working with a private landowner to try to work through some of these kind of challenging considerations. If it's not the balloon track area, there's any other parcel that would be impacted by the roadway would have to be looked at. That's kind of a typical part of the process when evaluating a project of this magnitude. You do site assessments to determine, if it's necessary to do further evaluation for contamination on those sites. So that's all part of the plan to do that going forward. We didn't really dig into the depths of it at this point, because that's not really what this study was, the intent of this study. Sea level rise, again, we're in the coastal zone. Sea level rise is something that we have to take into consideration with all our projects in the coastal zone. We looked at sea level rise, especially in the areas like the balloon track and the middle couplet, from the standpoint of the work that's been done on Humboldt Bay, where we've had a lot of elevation studies done looking at different elevations on different projections for sea level rise. And so we took a look at those. We also looked at, to a certain degree, at inundation pathways based on elevations. And so those were kind of used to look at balancing out, what project, which alternative might be more, feasible than another based on that. There's certainly much more work to be done here. Currently, the city, have a project to look at some of our capital infrastructure, which will really advance in some of these areas, the study that's being done there, and looking at doing the modeling and, not only looking at the elevation of the rise of the seas, but also looking at the storms that are coming down from above in the watersheds and how those impact the area as well. So a number of things that we're also going to be looking at there to hopefully advance the study in this area, which will help inform, making decisions in the future on alternatives. Tsunamis are also a consideration, has to be thought of in this area. We're certainly much of the corridor is in the tsunami zone. Mitigation, if there are going to be impacts on the project on wetlands or other sensitive habitats, we've looked at potential mitigation projects that would have, a greater benefit than the impact they would provide. At least that's the way we see it right now. So, looking at trying to increase, you're going to impact a certain amount of wetlands, be able to increase the restoration of some wetlands adjacent to the project in a much more impactful way. And we think there's some great opportunities in the local area, especially around the middle couplet area for some habitat restoration and fill removal and wetland creation in some areas that could use it. Again, I mentioned a little bit about sea level rise and adaptation. That's part of what we, how could this project help the city, help Caltrans, help other agencies and private property owners or business owners adapt to sea level rise? Again, something we try to incorporate into all of our projects at this point, especially a large project like this where it could have, pretty significant changes to the area. How could this project help the community adapt to sea level rise? So these are all things that we're certainly tracking and won't lose track of moving forward. And they're certainly worth mentioning. With that, I'll turn it back to Todd.
Thanks, Jesse. And in fact, I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie Clark, if I can do that, my teammate here at GHD, to go through our project benefits and costs. Mackenzie, do you have the ability to speak?
I do.
Oh, perfect.
As long as you can flip the slides for me, then we're good.
I meant technologically, not physically.
Okay. Valid question. Great. So to go through just some of the numbers to all of these improvements, of course, a necessary component of this plan included identification of project costs. So in this table, we show the breakdown of project costs associated with segments, and that was primarily done just due to the differing nature of the segment. So the southern segment, the middle segment, the northern segment, with a total project cost of $155 million. Obviously, the middle and northern segments have a much higher cost, and that is due primarily to the couplet options. And keep in mind that these are preliminary planning level costs. And as Todd mentioned, they do include environmental mitigation and remediation cost estimates, as well as contingencies and support costs, but these are the preliminary opinions of cost, very planning level estimates. On this next slide, we have a summary of the quantitative benefits that were monetized for the preferred concept. And some of those include safety benefit, bicycle or transit ridership, mode shift, so that's reduction in vehicular traffic or vehicle trips. Associated with that, of course, is air quality improvement and emissions reduction benefits, and vehicular delay and reduction. Improvements associated with safety benefits and can include bike lanes, sidewalk gap fill, and conversion to one-way vehicular travel. And all of those improvements have associated monetized costs associated with various crash types and crash severity types. And other benefits related to the reduction of vehicular trips and reduction in vehicular delay are monetized in terms of air quality and emissions benefit.
Yeah, and just add on, not to interrupt, but we use the Caltrans economic parameters for all of that, again, to make sure that there's no surprises when future grant applications are put together. So we used Caltrans benefit cost tools, and then in some cases we kind of deconstructed them because we weren't using all components of it. But all of this should fall in line with a future grant application with no surprises on the benefit side.
And to tie it all together, as Todd mentioned, most of the improvement cost and benefit calculations were done in part for future grant and funding program applications. The entire project, the entire corridor with the southern, middle, and northern segments, again, with a total cost of around $155 million and a total benefit of just over $626 million, results in a benefit cost ratio of 2.75, which is a great value. And we also, with the prior or after the draft submittal within this final report, we have provided a breakdown of those benefit costs per segment. And those obviously have different calculations with vehicle miles traveled reduction. And so there's not a direct translation, but overall we see, consistently above to benefit cost ratio all the way up to 4.75 for the southern segment. So a great balance between benefits and costs for the entire corridor.
Thanks, Mackenzie. And yeah, the southern segment here having the highest benefit cost, again, shows the highest return on investment. And so on the next slide, I'll describe how that southern segment project is actually already moving forward. But anything over a 1 is demonstrating a positive cumulative return on investment. So we have some room there, some comfort between 1 and our scores, which is nice to have. Anyway, I'll move on to the southern segment, which is really a cool side benefit of this project. We didn't anticipate this when we started this. It wasn't, in any scope of work or goal plan or anything like that. But this opportunity came up, and Brad mentioned it earlier, to essentially submit this project for some set aside money for complete streets through the Caltrans SHOP program. It's looking good. The project is currently in planning phases. I believe the first step in this project would be a PID, oh man, why am I forgetting what a PID? I can't believe I'm having a total blank.
Initiation document.
Thank you. Project initiation document. Oh boy. So that would be the next step in that process. It's something like a PSR. So very exciting. We got a lot of support letters on that one. Again, these are all improvements within the existing alignment. I think this was kind of a win-win for everybody involved. And so it was great to see a coalition of all the stakeholders, including all the partner agencies, really sign on to this project and see the tremendous value that it brings. And we hope that it really gets some momentum going towards implementation of the full plan. Another kind of, I don't want to call it a side project because it's within our report, but it really came as a response to community feedback and the data we were seeing kind of come in as we were preparing the project, is a near-term kind of safety plan, some near-term safety actions that could be done short of implementing this full project. But some areas where we think there could be some pedestrian crosswalks enhanced, we can't just put a crosswalk and call it good. We're looking at bulb outs, median refuges, you got to cross a decent width. So having somewhere in the middle, some flashing beacons potentially, that's one. There's also a question of pedestrian lighting. I know the city and Caltrans are both making some progress there. So these things are underway. If there are any questions about where those are, I'm not the person to ask. I'm not implementing any of those, but I'd be happy to redirect those questions to anybody on the call that can speak to them. But we did dedicate a whole subsection of the report to these kind of a toolbox of near-term actions that could be made to improve conditions on Broadway. One thing we didn't really advocate for is the addition of bike lanes today. And there is some desire maybe to do so, potentially some room to do so on some segments, but we think that Class 2 bike lanes are just not the right facility. You need to have that protection. And that's why we recommended the Class 4 with a physical separation between the cyclist and the roadway. Just nature of the vehicle speeds, particularly off-peak hours. People are hauling pretty fast through here. And we don't want to design a facility that's going to invite more potential danger. So that's my take on that. Next steps. So the next step, the first step here in front of you tonight is to accept this plan. And we hope you do. I think that this really is the culmination of a tremendous partnership between HCOG, the city, and Caltrans, the stakeholder groups. We had a lot of good engagement with a lot of different people. And we think that the outcome is really a document that we can all be proud of. And beyond that, it's to advocate for this project as a regional priority. This will be a fantastic project if it's implemented, and one that really the whole state of California can be proud of. I'm not exaggerating. This is a very transformative concept for the Eureka Broadway corridor. Near-term safety projects, I think those need to keep moving, and there are people in the agencies involved that are already moving on those. So we're making headway there. And then beyond that, so addressing those near-term safety needs, just continuing to implement the proposed corridor plan, starting with that southern segment that received that complete streets funding through SHOP. Once that project initiation document, the PID, is underway, you'll move into design. There's also a project initiation document on the northern end that could be refreshed, looking around the Coster couplet area. And then the middle segment will need its own project initiation document. Environmental phase should follow after that. And then really the goal from the outset of this was to prepare the Solutions for Congested Corridor Planning Grant, program grant. And this would fund this funds tremendously expensive projects. And so this project is meant for that program. It's visionary in the way that that program kind of requires. It demonstrates the positive benefit cost, and it's holistic. It checks all the boxes that that program is looking for. We didn't even talk about disadvantaged communities, but there's a tremendous benefit to a recognized disadvantaged community in this as well. Next cycle for that is due summer 2022. It is an aggressive timeline, but if we can get moving on the northern section, maybe we take that one first, and then middle section needs a little bit more planning. You want to get through a good chunk of environmental before you submit. And anyway, I'll leave it at that. Take any questions, and that's the end of my presentation. So back to you, Beth.
Great, thank you. Jesse, I see your hand up.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to mention, this is kind of our, our last report publicly. And I just think I want to take the opportunity real quickly to recognize our consultant team who's been really dedicated to this project and taken it very personal as far as trying to meet the needs of, all the partners, from the public partners to the community partners to stakeholder groups, and really try to hear everybody and try to bring it all together, and have done a great job of communicating back out. Todd does a wonderful job, and Mackenzie as well, as far as speaking on the project and really being an advocate on the team's behalf. And so I just really, want to thank Todd and Mackenzie and their team for working hard for us and doing a great job. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jesse, for that. And yeah, to Todd and Mackenzie, it's been an absolute pleasure and really fun to come on this project at the end, sort of the finale for this phase, and see how much you've all accomplished. So yeah, thank you for that. And I guess I would just like to close our staff presentation, really just reiterating the next steps that Todd presented, and if you're bored at HCOG here, if you accept this plan, really what you're doing is you're giving an indication to staff that this is a regionally important project, and we're going to be aggressively working on it. We're going to be promoting this. We're going to be working with our partners at Caltrans and the city to seek funding opportunities and to move this ball forward. So that's really, it doesn't commit HCOG to any specific action. Each individual action in the future will come before your board, but it does tell staff this is important and this is what we're going to spend some time on. And we'll do that initially through existing work elements, and as funding becomes available, we will make, just like this project was, a separate work element for those pieces. And then the other piece of it, I think, is, certainly at the staff level, with acceptance of this plan, we'll be advocating for it. But I think your board as well becomes advocates for this plan, recognizing it as a regionally important project. And so I think those are the immediate next steps, both for the near-term safety improvements and the longer range plan. So staff is recommending acceptance of the plan, and we are also recommending that you find the plan exempt from further environmental review under CEQA, which is explained further in the staff report. So that really concludes our presentation, and yeah, we'd be happy as a team here to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you all, and thank you for the hard work that was put into this. And it's a large project to solve a large problem, and with a large public benefit, especially in the safety aspects of it. At this time, does any board members have a question or comment for this?
Looks like a good project to me.
Yes, it does. Councilmember Arroyo.
Thank you. I don't know if you're inviting the pack as well, but I just
Yes.
had one quick question and then a couple comments when it comes time for comments. But the question was about, I noticed in the plan when it details some of the improvements to the southern portion of the corridor, there is a discussion around improvement of bus stops and in that area, but then in the shop proposal, I didn't see that. And I just wanted to voice that our general manager, Greg Pratt, has already been communicating with Caltrans about additional stops near like Pearson's or Lithia, both northbound and southbound stops, and a need for that. So I wanted to see if there was an opportunity to include that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it's already in the plan, but since you brought up the shop proposal, I wanted to see if it was something that can be included in that.
Yeah, I think, Brad, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I was actually thinking perhaps I pass it to Jamie. But I'll start.
Please.
Yeah, we have been in discussion with Greg Pratt, and we, at a minimum, will be recognizing that those need to happen and not build something that gets in the way and has to be deconstructed. And if we can fit them in, we certainly will.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to be here to say that we really want it, and riders have been asking for it because the furthest southbound stop is at McCullen. So thank you.
Councilmember West.
I'm a biker, and so I have ridden quite a bit through Eureka, and I just think this is a fabulous idea. So I'm really pleased with it. But I'm curious why, after putting in a really nice bike trail all the way along the coast and a kind of an alternative to going down Broadway, why you still direct bikes on Broadway? I mean, why wouldn't we want to use the bike trail that's out there and have outlets for the bike trail to get to the businesses? Just curious why you would do the whole thing on the freeway instead of just using bike trails.
Sure, and again, I'll take that, but I welcome other people to contribute. We recognize that the bike trail is there. It gets significant usage, but there's a large segment of the bicycling population that don't go there, that they're using bicycles as a means of transportation and aren't recreational biking, let's put it that way. And those folks are going to stay on the main drag, and we need to accommodate them. So that's why we felt we should go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Any other PAC members? Okay, Christy, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do. And the last four numbers, 5603. You can go ahead, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon. This is Colin Fisk. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. As you all know, I think our top priority, along with many of our fellow stakeholders in the corridor planning process, has been implementation of significant near-term safety improvements on Broadway to address the ongoing safety crisis, particularly for people walking and biking and rolling. We really appreciate the efforts that have gone into this planning process, but we do have concerns with the plan. We've laid those out in a comment letter, which was also signed by EPIC and Humboldt Baykeeper and the North Coast Environmental Center. You heard in the presentation, Todd, responding to some of our comments, which I really appreciate. I do want to highlight, though, one of the biggest concerns, which is that, as I believe Brad mentioned earlier, due to the targeted funding source, the plan places traffic congestion as a priority right along with safety improvements. And really, as a consequence of that, the only way that the planners and engineers could find to implement the needed safety improvements was to add a lot of right-of-way through the couplet concept. Those couplets do have appealing features, but we know that they will take a long time to build. And frankly, are concerned they may not be built at all because of issues involving coastal wetlands and the contamination et cetera. So we feel that we can't afford to wait a long time or run the risk of improvements never being made. So I just want to point out that if congestion relief were not a priority, if we're utilizing different funding sources, a lane or two on Broadway could be converted to protected bike and pedestrian infrastructure without constructing new streets. And I think that the plan itself, even in its constrained assessment of the existing alignment, demonstrates that there are a lot of significant improvements that can be made without adding more right-of-way. We do very much appreciate, as Todd reviewed, that the plan does recommend near-term safety improvements along with the longer-term couplet idea, and we very much support those near-term improvements. We also call for quick build protected bike lanes, and I can talk about why we think that's a good idea with anyone who's interested, along with additional traffic calming measures such as street trees and so forth. So I just urge you to direct staff to focus their efforts on near-term safety improvements on Broadway until those are completely implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Do we have anybody else?
No, that concludes public comment.
Okay, well, is there any other questions or comments from the PAC? Mayor Seaman.
I just figured as a representative from Eureka, I would let you guys know sort of how it went with the city. It's been a while since we had our presentation, and as other people have mentioned, it's been nice to hear that a lot of the concerns that I think the city had have been addressed since that time. So there were some, we approved it and endorsed the program going forward. We did have some, concerns about short-term efforts being made for safety, which have been addressed. Some environmental considerations, which Jesse went over pretty thoroughly today. And then the third thing was we had a unanimous agreement the other day that we wanted to see landscaping more integral to the project, but it looks like that has also been addressed. So we appreciate you listening to the comments and being adaptive to it. And I think that we will hope for the best and hope this moves forward with as few problems as possible. Does that sound like a fair assessment, Councilmember Arroyo? Okay.
And Councilmember Arroyo.
Thank you, Mayor Seaman, and thank you, Chair. Yes, that does sound like a fair assessment. And I wanted to make a couple of comments with my HTA chair hat on in addition. So really, really favor this idea of the transit lanes wherever possible. That is an excellent opportunity. Our general manager felt that the shared bike transit lanes where the right-of-way is narrower are a perfectly acceptable alternative, especially since a lot of that narrower segment on the northbound side, there's relatively short and easy access to the waterfront trail. Any accompanying improvements that Caltrans can work with the city on to improve wayfinding and awareness of the trail will serve transit users as well as people are changing modes. So that would be really helpful to incorporate into the project where possible. Dial-a-ride in the region is something that is working, but is expensive and challenging in such a large region. So HTA has really focused on encouraging folks who can use transit on our regular line to use that as much as possible. So any of these connections for pedestrians to transit, for them to be as focused on accessibility and ease of use as possible would be wonderful. It looks like there's a lot of pedestrian improvements already, but I always like to say that all transit users are pedestrians too, because people are getting to and from the stops. And so that's just incredibly important. And I really want to underscore all of the little things that the everyday folks and users of this system who aren't in cars will be experiencing. And then, you know, I think with my person who lives in this community hat on, I would just say underscore the urgency of improvements to Broadway, both short term, Broadway 4th and 5th Street, both short term and longer term, and just I will do anything I can to push for that. And I really appreciate Caltrans staff working on this, and city staff and HCOG staff all working on this, as well as the consultant team. But when you look at the data, I didn't have very much time to review the final version of this document, but I appreciated how much the data was front and center, and it is harrowing to see where we rank as a community as far as you know, the injury and fatality rates. It's awful. So thank you for commitment to making it better, and I really hope those short-term improvements happen as soon as feasible, as well as those improvements to the southern portion. And thank you for putting that into the shop.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I would move that the PAC recommends that the HCOG board adopt resolution 2104, accepting the final Eureka Broadway multimodal corridor plan from Mayor Jones.
I'll second that. You got to the reading faster. I couldn't figure out where the reading, I had to find it.
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Mayor Hindley,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar, Councilmember Gordon Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Arroyo,
Yes.
Mr. Robertson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. Thank you. And we move to the draft fiscal year 21-22 overall work program and budget. And again, we have a staff report.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I will take this item. This item before the board this afternoon is the draft overall work program and budget for fiscal year 21-22. The OWP is the primary management tool for HCOG, and it contains a description of activities that will be accomplished throughout the upcoming fiscal year. And it's also required to be in compliance with Caltrans's regional transportation or transportation planning guidelines, which it does. The OWP contains a number of work elements that are considered routine, and they're programmed in there yearly. And this, for the upcoming fiscal year, there are currently no new projects being funded, but there are a few projects that are being carried over from this current fiscal year. One is the RTP update. It is scheduled to be completed by December 2021. There's also the pavement management system update. This is a work element that shows up in our OWP approximately every 4 years. And there is the regional housing planning study. And so both of those will be continued throughout the upcoming fiscal year. I am happy to say that HCOG recently filled the position of associate planner, and we do now have 5 full-time employees on staff. And so the OWP does include funding for 5 full-time employees necessary to implement the in-house projects. And staff is asking that the board consider a 1% cost of living increase, which is reflected in the budget. And the 1% increase has been derived from the Labor of Statistics Consumer Price Index, and it is below what that is. With the board's approval, staff will forward the draft OWP to Caltrans for their review and comments. And once they've approved it, it will come back before you for final approval. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Now there, Mayor Jones.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you for including all of the acronyms that you had in your appendix. However, on page 42, because I'm from Blue Lake, I noticed there was an item at the bottom of the page, Arcata to Blue Lake, and the acronym CAPM, which I thought, well, great, I'll look at your acronym list and see, and I could not find that. Can you just tell me what CAPM stands for?
You go to page 42 and look that up and see what it's talking about.
Well, it's talking about pavement rehabilitation. So I assume the P stands for pavement, but
May I respond?
Yeah.
It's a capital preventative maintenance project. It's essentially an overlay.
Oh, thank you, Brad.
Capital.
Preventative maintenance. So CA for capital and then PM for preventative.
Oh, okay. That's what was the problem. Okay, capital. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Any other questions or comments? Supervisor Bass.
Thank you. Actually, my comment was going to be, having been gone from HCOG for a while, I forgot how in depth these reports go. And I was really impressed just seeing all the efforts to break down everywhere it's going and everywhere it's coming from. And that was a lot of work. So I found, of all things, I found it fascinating reading. Who knew?
Yes. And as we await to see if there's any public comment, I did have one question myself that came up while I was looking at the SAFE program. And I was just wondering if, and I noticed that we have an inventory of the call boxes, and I was wondering if that was publicly accessible, if it was in a map format.
I believe we do have it in a map format, but we do have a list of all of those, and we can provide that to the board at the next board meeting, or I could just have somebody send that to you.
Yeah, I was just interested in the map portion myself. I do touring, traveling, motorcycle rides, and just kind of handy to have that list of information in case it's ever needed. I do take an extra cell phone, but it's not always in cell phone territory. And Councilmember Arroyo, did you have a comment?
Oh, I echo that. I had a different question, but were you done with? Okay. I just wanted to get a sense. I have also been gone from the Policy Advisory Committee for a hot minute, and I wanted to see where it stood. It's not exactly clear to me from the official work program, but I know in the past, some of the delays with the corridor project, the safety corridor project had resulted in some of the local funds needing to be reprogrammed to help fill the funding gap. And I wanted to see if that is anticipated to happen again, or is that program funding wise able to, or that project able to move forward?
That would be a question for Beth.
Yeah, I'm still coming up to speed. I don't have a ton of background on that. I'm not sure if Brad might be able to speak to that in terms of where that project's at now, and what we might anticipate in future years.
So if we're talking about the Eureka Arcata corridor, I don't have the details in my head, but I do believe that that program is a project fully funded. It's actually a group of about 5 projects, and I don't anticipate it will need additional funding, nor will it have any problem using the funding it has. So.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding was that those local funds had been reprogrammed over a couple of years, and so it pushed back quite a few of the local projects that were funded by Caltrans dollars through various mechanisms. I'm not exactly sure whether it's STIP or LTF or whatever, but yeah, I was concerned that are those local programs then able to just go forward as planned just a couple of years later? Is that your understanding?
It would depend upon the program. It probably wasn't LTF. It might have been RTIP dollars that you're describing. And in that case, yeah, I think those are available now as we find out if we have RTIP dollars, because those fund estimates haven't come out yet.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And I think there was it was going to go to CTC to see about sending it back to the local us here. And I don't know if that's happened yet or if it's coming up in March, but I'm pretty sure that our Caltrans PAC member, when we get a report on last chance grade, we'll be able to address some of these questions. Any public comment waiting out, Christy?
There is no public comment.
Okay, and is there any other PAC member questions or comments? If not, we'll entertain.
Yeah, this is Jesse Robertson. I do want to just point out that on the agenda, there is an update on the Eureka Arcata corridor project. I don't necessarily, I'm going to be providing a written statement from the project manager, Jeff Pimentel, who is unable to be here tonight. So, I have, a pre-prepared statement that doesn't necessarily address some of those questions about, any kind of remaining, funding needs for that project. But, I think we should probably wait till we get to that item, since I don't necessarily have the information that you guys were looking for specifically. So I just wanted to let you know that that is out there. We should be talking about that.
All right, thank you. Barring any other, Brad.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask the executive director if it'd be possible to sort of continue this item when we're done in 7, A, B, and C, if we could allow Jamie Mattioli to talk about both the Broadway bike lane project and the minor project that we'll be doing, the bikeway crossings. That would seem to be an appropriate place to have that discussion.
Yeah, that was hopefully the intent. And we want to be including that at all future meetings as well as an update on the Broadway project.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll, barring any other questions, we'll entertain a motion.
I will move to recommend that the HCOG board approve the draft fiscal year 2021-22 OWP and budget.
I'll second that. And Susan, you found the words before I did.
It's juggling the whole computer thing back and forth. So.
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Supervisor Bass?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Mayor Seaman?
Yes.
Mayor Hindley?
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar?
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson? Councilmember West?
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Arroyo?
I have a point of clarification. The motion was the HCOG board approving it. Is that also going to me as a policy advisory committee member?
I did. That is how it was written. I wondered that as I was reading it, but it's how it was written on the report or the agenda.
Chair, do you have a recommendation about that?
For the overall work program, it is part of the PAC.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going with.
It actually says the PAC will consider recommending that the HCOG. So you're recommending also that the board adopt this?
Yes, I recommend you adopt it.
Thank you. Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, I'm going to abstain because I look at that OWP and provide a separate approval from Caltrans. So I'm going to.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, motion passes.
All right, thank you. And with that, we'll entertain a motion to reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations.
I so move, Mayor Jones.
Second.
Yeah. All right, we have a motion and a second again.
Okay. Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Mayor Hindley,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson, Councilmember West,
Yes.
Councilmember Mike Johnson.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes.
thank you. All right, we come now to item 7, staff and PAC member reports, including Caltrans report on the 101 corridor, the last chance grade, and as we wanted a record on the southern portion, the complete streets element. So.
Well, I can start off. I have a report from Jeff Pimentel, the project manager for the Eureka Arcata Corridor project. He tells me that the project development team is continuing to work on the completion of the design of the project with the delivery date of March 5th, 2021, which is 2 weeks later than was previously reported. Despite the 2-week push in the schedule, the allocation of the construction support and construction capital funds will take place at the May CTC meeting. Jen Buck, the chief of project management at Caltrans, communicated to Jeff Pimentel that the HCOG board and executive director Beth Burks are interested in a presentation on the Eureka Arcata Corridor project. So Jeff and Jeff will work with Beth to schedule this presentation for a future HCOG board meeting. So that's all that I received from Jeff Pimentel. I did also want to offer an opportunity for Brad Medham to speak. He was looking for an opportunity to contribute to this to the Caltrans updates. Brad?
Thank you, Jesse. I just wanted to bring forward 2 points. The first one is that you would normally be seeing Kevin Tucker here. You're not seeing Kevin because he's on vacation, but he's also accepted a position with Caltrans in headquarters. So we'll be, Jesse will be covering for him. He's an able replacement for that until I refill that position. And then I'll introduce the new senior to you. And also, you may not know, but the last chance grade has been closed again for a good portion of the afternoon. It is currently open. And I say currently with the line under it, because I cannot tell you how long it was going to stay that way. But we're escorting people through there right now. So if you're ever going north, call first. Check. So that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think Jamie Mattioli was here. I think he's, I don't know if it's the same item or if it's scheduled separately, but I think he was here to provide an update on the last chance grade project. Jamie?
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, I can talk about last chance grade, please, and also a quick update on the Broadway complete streets. So last chance grade, as Brad mentioned, we've had the landslide, we've had the closures. We just had verbal approval from our headquarters to fund an emergency project. So that approval's in place, and really the construction group, the goal is to remove the slide material that's in place now. They're going to use special equipment, these spider excavators that can kind of crawl around, and they're going to install a rock fall protection system to mitigate what could fall, what could continue to fall. So just echoing Brad's statement, please check the quick map and call and make sure it's open, because more rains are coming and more movement is likely
likely. So there's a $14 million verbal approval for that construction work at Last Chance Grade. So that's the short-term side. We have 2 jobs in Caltrans at Last Chance Grade. We have to keep the current road open and safe. And we also have to find a long-term fix. And there's 2 major things going right now for the long-term fix. We're working with our 4 working groups to determine what alternatives we carry forward through the full environmental process, performing environmental studies. We have 4 working groups, and we're meeting with those groups 3 times each on this process to make a decision what alternatives we carry forward. We want to eliminate alternatives, not only because it saves money and time, but because it reduces risk and it improves our odds of staying on schedule for this critically needed project. So we really need to find an alternative that's safe, sustainable, reliable, and honors those resources out there and minimizes impacts to all sorts of really important, unique resources in that area. So the first round of those alternative screening meetings has happened in December. We've been developing measurements that go into a decision matrix, and we are meeting with the working groups the first week of March to present that decision matrix, what it could look like, what alternatives are looking to perform better than others. And then we plan to come back in early April for the 3rd round of meetings, and that's when we come and say, hey, we have a recommendation. These are the alternatives we want to move forward with. Do you have any concerns about the decision? Do you have any concerns about the process we use? So that's how we're working towards narrowing those alternatives. And studies are happening this spring, beginning with botanical surveys in March, all over the footprint of the project. So it could be up to 500 acres that are studied this year. The goal is to get all the environmental studies completed this year so we can begin writing that draft environmental document. That's my update on Last Chance Grade. And I could take questions now or after the Broadway Complete Streets part. I don't have a lot to add on Broadway Complete Streets. There was 2 very excellent presentations. Brad talked about it, and then we heard from City and HCOG. I'll just remind folks that Caltrans headquarters has agreed to add this to the SHOP, the southern portion of Broadway corridor plan, which is now the Broadway Complete Streets project. It's a $13 million project, and this is really a showcase. Headquarters used the word transformative. We heard that word before. It's a transformative project that has the coalition of the city, HCOG, NGOs, others who have written support letters, and headquarters chose this as one of the only ones that's a standalone bike and ped project, and it's a showcase that this could work, and a showcase that the engagement part is very important. So this will get a lot of attention statewide. It can be shared around as an example of a way to move forward on a very important ped and cyclist project in the state. We mentioned that we're developing a project initiation document. The goal is to have that completed this August. And the goal is to have a project ready to list. That's our, when we're ready to share the plans, specs, estimates, and ask for a bid from a contractor. That timeline, the goal is June 24. So we're still developing all the pieces of the schedule that go into that as we develop the PID. And engagement is critical. So we're building on the excellent work that has been done by HCOG, the city, to study the corridor, and we need to continue that good work as we engage with all of the key stakeholders, partners, business people, et al. So that's a critical piece. And Brad mentioned the mid-block crossing project. It's a minor project. Currently, there's one crossing planned at the Village Pantry restaurant location. And the scope of that project is important to the scope of the Broadway Complete
Street project. So that'll likely go first, and we'll see what is supported by the community. What scope can we get done there? And we've heard from the community that the details, these scoping details, are important to people. That's all I had on Broadway Complete Streets and Last Chance Grade. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Jesse, Jamie, or Brad before? I know that the engagement is important. I've heard a lot of chatter in League of California Cities talking about if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. So we want to be at the table. Any questions, comments? Okay, nothing here. Anything from, oh, Mayor Seaman.
I was just going to say before we adjourn, I was going to ask if I could update on the traffic safety task force. So.
Absolutely.
All right. I wanted to let everybody know that the Traffic Safety Task Force has a first meeting date, which is going to be March 10th. I'm very excited about that. In that group, we are going to be working on a proclamation that's going to encourage residents to commit to being cautious and conscientious of the role of traffic safety and trying to adopt that as a community value. And so just like the Broadway Multimodal Corridor project, which is located in the city of Eureka, it affects everybody because everybody from the county drives through Eureka. So we have reached out to a larger community for the task force, and I'm happy to say Mayor Jones will be participating. Supervisor Jet Bass will be participating. We also have City of Rio Dell, Trinidad, Fortuna, and I'm really interested in talking about it from the City of Arcata, but we haven't actually touched base, so I don't want to commit for her. So we will hopefully adopt this idea that traffic safety is a community value throughout the county, and that's where we are so far.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions, comments, reports from members? Okay, seeing none, we will adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See you March 10th.
Yeah.